you have to be married or something, or you have to have kids. And often churches cater to kids or cater to families or cater to married couples. And yet we forget about the single people in the church.
Being true to yourself is important.
We're pro-image of God. We value the image of God.
Yeah, I was like, oh.
Guy is still being obedient to God. Thank you for
Those in Christ will come out stronger.
Welcome everyone to the Ever Wonder Why podcast, where we tackle real world questions. And today we're going to tackle the question of church ministries, but more specifically, singles ministries. And today we actually have a guest, Jordan. She's usually behind the scenes in AVL, but today we have her as a guest. So Jordan, what are your opinions on church ministries and singleness?
My opinions on church ministries and singleness. I think I've said for a long time, I feel like singleness is an important aspect that we have to make sure we're encompassing in churches. Often I think there's people who are single can get forgotten or can get almost like a judgment because we're single instead of being married. And so I think churches recognizing that you have single people in your church and that it's not a bad thing. We're not all called to marriage. I'll actually use this as a transfer reference. Matthew 19, you see Jesus talking to the disciples, and they actually talk about, I'm going to pull the reference up here so you guys can see it. Matthew 19, the disciples said to him, "If such is the case of a man and his wife, is it better not to marry?" But he said to them, "Not everyone can receive this, saying, but only to those whom it is given. For there are eunuchs who have been so from birth, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by men, and there are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Let everyone who is able to receive this receive it." And so even here you see Jesus talking about, in reference eunuchs being single, but in the same sense as like some people are called to that. And so those who are supposed to walk in singleness should. And Paul later talks about in 1 Corinthians, we can talk about that too. But I think recognizing that some people in our churches are called to singleness, and how do we support them in a church environment, and not this expectation that everybody is married or has kids, and all of us in some point or another walk in singleness in our life, whether you're my age and 31 and still single. Some people, I know you walked in singleness until you got married, right? Until you were 28. So there's different people in those different walks of singleness. But I think especially within the young adults age, and some of our older, it's easy to forget about single people in our church.
Man, one point you made that's very true is that singleness doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. Mm-hmm. It doesn't also necessarily mean that you're destined to have a partner. Mm-hmm. So whether you're single and you're destined, or God has a plan for you to be married, is one avenue, but there's also the avenue of being single and just living a Christ-filled life as a single individual. If God calls you to that, then that's also a blessing in itself. It's not necessarily looking at it as a bad thing, right? So what are your thoughts, Alexis?
I do think that it's not just something that happens in the church. I think it's societal too, that I guess this idea that everyone is going to end up married, or that's the goal. And so I think it can be difficult and frustrating for even those outside the church. And I mean, we live outside the church too, and then you come into church and it's kind of the same idea that like, oh, you'll find someone, or God has a plan for you with that, which doesn't mean that's not true. But sometimes I do think there's catchphrases in church, and that might be one of them, like you'll find someone, or God has someone for you. And so I just think it's a whole world thing, to the idea that you should end up married, and if you're not yet, then you like haven't made it, or you're putting your life on pause, let's say. So I do think that's kind of a mindset.
Yeah. Like you mentioned earlier, right? I am married, Jordan, so I I am out of that singleness era, but I remember being single and having a lot of emotions of feeling alone or feeling sad and not really having somewhere to go. Because even family members or even in our church, they would say, "Oh, you know what? God has someone for you. God has someone for you." And it was always looked at the avenue of God has someone for you, but what if, and I actually thought this, what if I'm not meant to be with someone, right? But my biggest thing was like not being able to go to someone or a church or a community that can at least guide me the right way.
Yeah.
So it brings up this next question, which is, do you feel that singles are overlooked in church ministry?
Yeah, I've said for a long time, I think you go into some churches, and like we've mentioned, you hear the language of like, just give it time, like you'll find somebody, just wait. I hate that, just wait. And I get the meaning behind it is like, wait for sex, like, or whatever. But I really feel like that's not the language that we should be using in a lot of ways, because I think there's this, it's almost like this promise of marriage that's not necessarily a promise for all of us. So I think we constantly look at this picture of like, you have to be married or something, or you have to have kids, and often churches cater to kids or cater to families or cater to married couples, and yet we forget about the single people in the church. You'll hear sermons, we hear sermons all the time about how to be a good wife or how to be a husband. You know, you have Father's Day and Mother's Day where you're going to hear about being parents or what it means to be a good father, right? But when do you preach on singleness? When do we talk about walking in that? And a lot of people walk in that at some point or another. So what does that look like? And I think to a point is like, yes, there's singleness in our world and that's becoming more thing, but also singleness walk as a church perspective is very different than a secular singleness, right? Like as a single person, I don't believe in going out and having sex outside of marriage, right? So like there's whole other world of walking in singleness as a Christian in my church. And so how are we making sure that we support people in our church who are single and having to walk a different kind of singleness than even what the world is talking about? And so I think there's so much to be said about how are you reaching out and like supporting single people in your churches. Are you preaching to single people as much as you preach to couples or parents or whatever it is? I'll say I have heard Pastor preach on singleness, and I've always appreciated that he's done that. It's one of those things that, you know, he doesn't just preach on marriage, or he doesn't just preach on being a parent. A lot of time he preaches to us as just everybody, and like I don't see it as like an exclusive thing of like, I don't really hear references to like the dads out there or the husbands out there. There is usually a application for everybody. And so I think that's like a huge piece of, not all churches do that. A lot of churches, it's this, we'll preach to married, we'll preach to families, we'll preach to high schoolers, but we forget about this whole other group of walking in a completely different journey.
Now, I know singleness is having that community. What about you, Alexis? Have you ever felt in your, I guess, Christian walk, have you ever felt like you can go to someone, or have you ever felt overlooked?
Yeah, I'll answer that and the other question, because I would say that I've never felt overlooked in the church. I'm sure it happens, but I've never felt like alone because I'm single, or because no one, I guess, talks directly about singleness. I think it's also because being here, our pastor speaks very, not generally, but the message is for you, whether you're married, whether you're single, whether you're a child, or an aunt or uncle. So I never felt like this message doesn't apply to me. But I would say that when I think of like leadership in our church, I can't really think of anyone as single. I know there are people, and maybe it's a good thing, like I'm not just seeing them as their relationship status, but I would say that I wouldn't really know who to go to for advice on that, like if I was having a difficult time. And maybe I haven't thought that much into it because growing up for me, I was never really interested in being in a relationship until like maybe my late 20s, which wasn't that long ago. But so I feel like for me it's a little different, but having friends that really wanted to be in relationships, even in high school, which I guess I shouldn't say that even in high school, but to me that feels really young. So, but and it was hard for me to kind of understand that. So I can see why those who really crave to be in a relationship or feel like they are meant to be married, how it can be difficult and not having those that support or I guess ministries geared towards helping you walk in that singleness can be difficult.
That's the beautiful thing when you said ministry is there to help you walk in that singleness, right? So for all of you that are believers or non-believers, singleness is something that we all go through. It's like we all come out of the womb single until we grow up single. It's not like we have a partner as soon as we're born. So that process of going through these things as a Christian, as we consider ourselves Christians, it's like during that stage of our lives where we're single, right? Quote unquote single. What is it that we should be doing? It's not about just finding a partner and thinking that it's going to be okay. What if you're single and you're struggling, but then you find a partner, but you're still struggling? So in that singleness era, what are we supposed to be doing? I know when I was there, one of the things I always focused on was my relationship with God. That was my first and foremost important thing. My relationship with God first, and then eventually, to be honest, it came to a point where I was so worried about God that being in a relationship wasn't something that occurred to me. It's something that I didn't look for it, because we have a lot of people out there that are seeking this. And let's be honest, you have those that are seeking it and they don't have a great relationship with God. And then you have those that are seeking it and they're walking the path of, reading their Bible, trusting in God and believing in God. So in that singleness era, for those that maybe are struggling, what has worked for you? What is something that sustains you, or how has God sustained you in that singleness, knowing that, hey, this is not a time for me to be worrying about who's my partner is. Let me get closer to God. Let me trust in God. And I know whatever he has for me, whether it be a partner or not have a partner, what are some ways or some things that's worked for you, or you felt that God has helped you in?
Yeah, I would say up until the last couple of years, I've always been so busy that I haven't even had time to date, really. I've dated 2 people in my entire life. So I think there's a part for me where it's even in the midst of that, I was in grad school, I was working. And so I was never in the space of I have to have a partner. I was if God put somebody in my life, great. But I always feel like God had a calling on my life and somewhere else. So I big in special needs ministry, big in, and I have my master's in applied behavioral analysis and autism. And so that was something where I felt like God was calling me to that. That's where I felt like God was leading me, was just working with people with disabilities, working with special needs. And so my focus was never really on finding that partner, but more on just what journey does God have me on, right? My life isn't on pause because I'm not married. My life is, I'm going and doing what God's called me to do here and now. And part of that was getting my degree as a BCBI. Part of that was, finishing up school, passing my tests. Probably a little more felt it, that desire for marriage in the last probably 2 years since I graduated, where I haven't been on this total rush of million things that I have to get done. But it's still in a space of saying okay, God, if you have something for me, that's great. Open those doors. But if you don't have that, either take that desire from me, or just, help me have a community around me. I'm so thankful for the family that I have that supports me. I don't, I spend a lot of time with my family when I can. I love being an auntie. It's one of my all-time favorite things. And so, I have close relationships with friends, And so I find ways to build community that isn't just about being in relationship with a specific person, but being in relationship with different people, right? So I have relationship within our young adults group, different people within our church. I have friends outside of church that I spend time with and I'm in relationship with. And so they're my community. And when things happen, there are people that I know I can go to, that I can trust, that I can have conversations with. Some of those people are also single, and they encourage me and push me in my faith. And some people are married, and so they're still good friends that I spend time with, and I do things, and they're in a different journey, but they are still part of my community. And I think that's a big thing, is not just having community with single people, only with single people, but having community with everybody, right? We're all on different walks. And so I don't know, I think when I felt lonely, trusting in God and just giving that to him. But he's definitely blessed me with a wonderful community where I don't have to always feel that loneliness. But I also have to do steps, right? Like some of that is, I can't be the person, if I choose to go home after church instead of socializing or instead of putting myself out there, instead of volunteering, then I'm putting myself in that position. And so a big part of, for me, is like, am I getting involved? When I moved out, I wasn't involved in a church. I was living alone at that point. And so I definitely felt that disconnect of not having the community anymore. And I was like, I can't keep doing this. I need a community. I need fellow Christians around me. A lot of my friends had moved away that were Christians. And so I only had phone calls with them or road trips to go see them, which wasn't all the time. And so for me, it was finding Fusion here, but I would say for anybody, if you're local, we welcome you here at Fusion, but find a church that you can get involved in and take those steps. If you're quick to run out the door as soon as service ends, that's not a way to build community. Spend time, get to know each other, get involved in Bible study, volunteer, find opportunities to get involved. You'll build community quickly when you get involved.
Yeah, I think the whole community is the big point, or part of it, because we are social creatures. We're supposed to have relationships, and those relationships vary, whether it's marriage or just friends, even acquaintances is a type of relationship. So I think the whole point on building a community around you is important. And then also developing yourself, because I will say I think Jesus is the best physician, but if you're someone who's just spiritually seeking or not really a believer yet, I still think it applies that when we're alone or not in a relationship that we're hoping would lead to marriage, let's say, when we're single, we're working on ourselves. I think that you're not trying to work on yourself to be a good enough person for the person you might end up with, if that's what's for your life. But I do think regardless of whatever your relationship status is going to be, you're going to have relations with others. And the whole point of us going through this life and going through difficulties and struggles and happy moments, all these things help us grow as a person. And so, and that will always help all your relationships. It'll help you be a better friend. It'll help you be a better loved one, a better family member. So I think our singleness is the time to really just build our character, and if we stay single, we continue to build that character, and hopefully live for Christ, because that's the greatest calling. And then if we do get married, that calling's still there. And how you were mentioning, what you felt called to when you were going through studying in school. It's not like that if you got married that calling would stop.
Right.
I do think that possibly it could change or shift a little depending on whether you start a family or whatnot. But we have a calling more than just our relationship status.
Right.
And I think Jesus, you could probably speak to that. I think you and Flora plan to have children in the future, so I believe your callings may shift a little or spread out a little. If you want to share a little bit on your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, calling, calling the original calling, right, that I had since I was a kid, that's still there. It's not necessarily that my calling has changed, it's how I approach the calling now. Where before, as a single individual, I had all the time in the world to just focus on God, keep my head down and run forward and just do what I'm supposed to do to get to where God wants me to go. Now that I am married, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but now it's not that I can just keep my head down and go forward because it's not only just me now. Now I have another individual that I have to worry about. So the calling's there, but now it shifts on how I have to approach this calling. But that's a whole different topic that we can get into. But going back to one thing that Jordan said that I really liked is that just because you are single does not mean that your life changes or your life is halted. Your life has a purpose. You have a calling. Whether you're an unbeliever or a believer or an unbeliever, singleness, your life does not stop.
Right.
You have to find that community that makes you feel at home. Just because you may go to church or may not go to church, at some point all of us have made friends before. And that's the most important thing. And we know how that feels when we have a friend to go to run to, and be able to express ourselves and say, hey, listen, this is going on, this is how I feel, what can I do? And you feel comfortable, you feel loved, you feel at home. So the fact that you said that is great, and then you bringing in the community portion of it, it's like, if you're out there and you're listening to this, community is so essential. In my time when I was single, I didn't have a community. I was the only young adult in my church, and it made things a lot more difficult to be able to run to someone and say, hey, listen, I'm feeling like this, pray for me. Or, hey, I don't know what to do now, because ultimately I got that same response that everyone always gives. Pray for it. God has a wife for you. God has someone for you. But let's be honest, that is not the answer I needed at that moment. I don't need a, hey, everything will be fine, God has a wife for you. No. That is later on. How about what can I do now? You know?
Yeah.
So with that brings up a question in my mind. If people out there that are unchurched or go to a church, for those that do go to a church, what do you think, or in your guys' opinion, what can they do to better provide a space for these people that are looking? Not only the people that are already sitting down in their chairs, but what about a straggler that comes along, that happens to walk in through the door, and maybe goes to church because he wants to feel like a community? What can the church do?
Yeah, I think having open doors and opportunities. One thing I know pastors said is like they always have like a Bible study. Like we have a Bible study going all the time, right? So it's been a conversation. Is like when you come in, is like, do you have opportunities for them to get involved? Are you open to like what kind of what supports do you have in place for different people in different walks? We here at Fusion have a young adults group. We have a really large young adults comparatively. We have and we have singles and married in that, right? So it's not just single people that are in our young adults, but we have many other groups and many other opportunities to get involved. So I think that that's a big thing. I think it's two parts. It's having a church that's open to that, but also being a person that's willing to open yourself up to that. And that can be scary sometimes if you've never walking into Fusion the first time I by myself, I didn't come with a friend. So there's a part of like, I have to take a leap to ask if there's things available. What do you guys have? Do you guys have a young adults? I think that was one of the first questions I asked the first time I got here, is like, do you guys have a young adults group? Like, what's out there? And so having resources like that, yes, having people who know too, right? It's not, I've been to churches where it's like, oh, I don't know, I have to go find, it's like, no, like, know what you have in your church and what's out there. So you don't have it as a hidden back door. I think we advertise stuff for the young adults. The young adults are not a hidden group of people in our church. We're very much a big part of the church, and so I think making sure that people know what is out there in your church, what activities, what events, whatever, what ministries do you have. It's also the language we use. And so I think like one thing you said is right. Like you hear people saying, well, you heard a lot of people saying, just wait, your spouse is coming. I think we have to be mindful of the language we use, not just for stragglers coming in, but for those that are already here, right? Like, are we isolating, or are we making sure that at all times we're being inclusive of the people? I think when we have this expectation where we tell people, well, just wait, like I said before, I think I get the context is like save sex for marriage, but again, I think that goes back to, it's almost like you're promising something that's not actually promised to everybody. It's something that, I mean, even Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians 7, like if you can stay single, stay single. And so what language are we using? Are we recognizing that not everybody's going to have, maybe instead of saying just wait, just say, hey, sex is for marriage. It's a beautiful thing. It's a wonderful thing in the confines of marriage, right? And some people get to be married, and that's great, but some people are going to walk in that singleness, and so how are we supporting them? A great point too within that is that, like, not you mentioned before, like you have two divided spaces now, right? Like you have to think about your wife, you have to think about her needs, but as single people, like we don't have that divided thought. Like our focus can be fully on God. Paul talks about in this 1 Corinthians 7 this.
So 1 Corinthians 7, starting at verse 6, it says, now as a concession, not a command, I say this. I wish that all were as I myself am, but each has his own gift from God, one of one kind and one of another. To be unmarried, and the widows, I say, that is good for them to remain single, as I am. But if they cannot exercise self-control, they should marry, for it is better to marry than to burn with passion. To be married, I give this charge, not I, but the Lord. The wife should not separate from her husband, but if she does, she should remain unmarried or else be reconciled from her husband to her husband. And the husband should not divorce his wife.
Yeah, and I think later it talks about, if you look further down in 17 through 24, the first lines of 17 is only let each lead the life that Lord has assigned to him and to which Lord has called him. This is my rule in all the churches. And I love that he says, like, in all churches. This wasn't something that was just given to the Corinthians. This was not just given to one church. He's saying this is for all. You know, this is not me speaking to one group. For context, I think some people will be like, well, you're taking that verse out of context. No, he says it for all churches. Like, be where you're supposed to be. If you're called to marriage, that's great. If you're not, then if you're burning for passion, then be married. And neither are sin. Like there's passages later in the same 1 Corinthians 7, he talks about like neither, if you get married, that's not a sin. And if you stay single, neither is sin. And so as churches, are we making sure that we don't look at either as one better than the other? I was listening to Pete Scacero recently did a podcast on this as well. And he was like, I make sure that I speak to couples and I speak to singles, right? If we have something for couples, we try to have something for singles. And I was like, I think that's really great. Like that's a great point. Are we having opportunities for both? Are we reaching both? Are we recognizing that both are gifts from God, one way or the other? And so I think that's just like when you have the opportunity as Christians, as single people, we don't have those divided focus. Our attention can be on Christ. And that's why Paul says, like, be like me if you can. His whole focus was on Christ's ministry, right? Sharing the word and going where God called him to. His life wasn't on pause because he was single. He was making big changes. Yeah, the forerunner for he wrote most of the New Testament. And so, you know, how are we making sure that we recognize that we might have people like that within our churches? Singleness isn't for everybody. But it's also not promised to everybody. And I think you get people who end up being really hurt. We've had purity culture where that just wait language comes in. And in one sense, it's not a bad thing that they're saying, but it's a language that's being said. And so when you get people who, I think for a long time, you feel like, well, I've done everything right. I've done everything I was supposed to do. I went to Bible school. I went to college. I did all these things, right? Why am I not married? And then people end up resenting God. And that's why I was like, I think language is really important. It's like, that's not always what's promised to us. And so recognizing that maybe God's calling to that, and what's your response to that calling? Are you open to God's calling you where he wants you, which his plan is always better than ours? Or are you seeking relationship because that's what you want, that's what you feel like you should have?
Yeah, I was thinking some things that the church can do, because I know we kind of spoke about this, like, oh, what if we had a singles ministry here at our church? And I'm kind of in the boat of, I don't know if I don't think a singles ministry is necessary. Maybe like just maybe a small group once a week to talk about like single focused studies, but because I do think that will help like everyone who has grown up with that language of like they're waiting, like everyone's just waiting for their person, and being able to bring up the topic of maybe it's not for you. And I know some people, especially if you're craving that, can feel sensitive to that. Like, what are you saying? And so to talk about like how nice it is to actually be single, the pros of it, and what you can do, like how you can serve God, not so much better, but just you have more time too. There's just like there's a lot of positives to being single, and I do think having maybe a small group or just even like an event where you talk about these things geared towards those who are single or are struggling to be single, that you know there's purpose for you besides getting married. And yeah, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, so one of the most important things I think in a church or in a community is to make sure that you are following God, that the core values of that group is you know what the mission is and what the vision of the group is. I know here at Fusion there was talks about a singles ministry, or there is talks about a singles ministry, not having a singles ministry. But I think one of the most important things, if it goes through, if it doesn't go through, we'll see what ends up happening. But ultimately, the most important thing is creating a singles ministry isn't just, all right, we have a singles ministry and that's it. You also have to have leadership in there. Leadership in someone that is willing to lead a group to make sure that everything is going through biblically. You can't just have somebody randomly leading a group and they're not biblically based, because then you end up having, a church full of people that just come to church because they want to find a partner. When essentially finding a partner, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but what is the goal of coming to God? God didn't die on that cross for us to be like, oh, we're going to make this a singles ministry and find partners every day long. No, he died on that cross for our sins. So ultimately, even in singles ministry and any ministry, the main focus obviously has to be Christ-centered. Now, if the result of a Christ-centered ministry is, you know what, I was able to find my partner there, then praise be to God. But ultimately, what I've realized, being in that singleness, in those moments that I was lonely, in those moments that I was looking for the wrong thing. A partner was not going to bring me happiness. I thought it was going to bring me happiness. It's not going to bring me happiness. The one thing that every ministry should have is God. And that doesn't matter if it's singles, couples, men's group, women's group. If it's not biblically sounded and it's not biblically centered around Christ, then ultimately that ministry fails. Here, if we don't have somebody that's, willing to take that step and say, you know what, I want to be part of this ministry. I want to go ahead, take leadership, and help other fellow singles not find a partner. Build your relationship with God, grow stronger as a single individual, and if the result of that is finding a partner, then I think that is where you're going to find more success. Now, I'm not an expert in this, but I think the most beautiful thing is, in your singleness, is to spend all that time that you have all that energy and following God. Build your relationship with God. Get stronger with Him, because ultimately, when you are ready, or when God sees, you know what, now is the time. He is mature, or she is mature. Because if you're not mature, and let's say you commit mistakes left and right, or let's say that you're very loose with the tongue, what about when you have that other partner there and you're still loose with the tongue and you're insulting your partner? Then it's like, well, now, I'm not saying that you're going to be perfect by the time you meet your partner, because I know I'm for sure am not, and I'm still learning. But having that foundation is very key in any ministry. And I think for those of you that are wondering, can I make a singles ministry? Can I not have a singles ministry? Is it good? Is it bad? I think ultimately it comes to what you believe in, but I will say, if it's not biblically sound, because we are talking about church ministries here, if it's not biblically sound and based on the word of God and is centered around God, then ultimately I just think that it's just like any other singles group out there that's not in a church. That's like,
Yeah, that's just
Yeah.
in society.
I think,
And,
yeah. I would say intentions are what's big about this, right? Like, is your intention about joining a singles ministry about meeting other single people and, like, so that you can find somebody? Or is your intention about building community and walking that singleness alongside other people, right? Like, so, and that's been kind of like the ongoing conversation, I think, is like making sure that if we do build this, how do we maintain those intentions, right? How do we keep it from the focus about being, well, now we have all these single people and
all in
like
one
they're
room.
looking for something. Yeah, it's like, I'm gonna be honest, sometimes I feel like it's a little awkward. Like, I feel like I'd rather be in a big group where it's like mix of people than like,
Yeah,
yeah.
and I do have thoughts about that, because kind of going back to like, oh, if you're a church wondering, should I open up a singles ministry or what should I do? I do think it also depends on the church, like what your community, what your members need. And I'm not totally against like a singles night where people go to meet each other. I would find it very awkward, but I do know that like some people like do need that opportunity to meet other singles, because it is still Christ-centered. It's like, oh, I'm looking for someone who has the same beliefs as me. I just think that when people think of singles ministry, that's what first pops in their head. Like, oh, okay, this is where singles come to meet and get married.
Yeah.
And we don't want that mindset. So as a singles ministry or a small Bible study or anything like that, like very Christ focused, very how do I grow as a person? How do I walk in my singleness? And then if you have an event here or there too, to just be like, hey, we're just having all the singles meet together, I think that's appropriate too at times, as long as it's not like the main focus of because singleness is not just about, like we've mentioned, it's not just about finding a partner. It's a way that everyone has been. All the married people have been single, so so it's normal, a normal state to be in.
But I think you even have people is like remembering that singles, it's not just for some of us who are young and not married yet, but you have people who have been married and maybe divorced. You have people who are married and are widowed. My grandfather, I think he's been single since I was 2 weeks old. So it's like my grandmother passed away when I was 2 weeks old. So my grandfather, I've never seen my grandfather with anybody else. So he walks in that very different journey, right? Like he's much older. He's been married. He has, us, some of his grandkids and that different life versus maybe some of us who like, I don't know if I'm ever going to be a mom or ever have like that. I'm an auntie. I love that. But like, I don't know if I'm ever going to. So even within the single journey, there's different journeys that we walk. Maybe you were widowed young, or maybe you were married for many, many years and you're just now entering that, right? Like Christ called that your spouse home, whatever that is. And so sometimes it's also knowing that there's different types of single people in the church. And so how do we recognize those people and maybe the different struggles within that? Some people, my grandmother is now having to learn to walk that as she was married up until my grandfather passed away in December. And so how do I walk in a life of like, she's not taking care of my grandfather anymore. She's, living on her own. This is the first time since I think she's always lived with somebody. So she's never, she got married young from what I remember, but she's been married for many, many years. And so like that's a new journey for her. And again, very different than mine, right? I'm a 31-year-old. I've never dated anybody. I have my family, which I love and care for, but I'm an auntie. Like, I'm completely different walk, very much career focused in a lot of ways over the years. And so that's a different journey that we're on. And so how do you make sure that even within if you have a singles ministry, are you ensuring that you recognize those different walks that are occurring? We've talked about even, do we need to have different ages for a singles ministry, because there is such a different, right? How do you keep
we're
some
very
of that?
multi-generational.
Yeah, we have both here. So I think those are all things you have to consider when you're looking at having a singles ministry. I think the intentions are big on this. You know, I think the key intention should be, how do you walk in singleness, whether you're wanting to get married, whether God's calling you to marriage in the future, or whether you're called to stay single for however long, whether it's your entire life or maybe for a period. I think the intention has to be, what does it mean to walk in that singleness? Am I seeking God? Do I realize my life is not on pause, but God still has a plan and a purpose for me, even in that singleness? And so that's the big piece here, is like, I think just taking the focus off of, am I going to meet somebody? Am I like, yeah, I think events are great for singles if you can have them, but I think just making sure that your intentions are always back on that focus of like, I'm walking this journey alongside other people who may also be walking that journey. Even if it's different, it's still a journey. You may still feel that loneliness, right? Some people may still go home to an empty apartment. That's a feeling that some of us are probably going to have regardless of what kind of singleness we walk in. And so may differ in the sense of whether you feel like missing, grief, or whatever, but that loneliness can still be a piece that can easily take over if you don't have supports in a community to help you.
So I would say that, like, for everyone listening, that even if your church doesn't have anything geared towards that, I guess the main focus is that God has a plan for you. He has a purpose for you. You're meant as just an individual, you have a plan set for your life. And I think that's important to understand.
Yeah.
Amen. I think that's very important. Church systems, if you're thinking about creating a singles ministry, or it's been on your heart to bring it up to your church leadership, definitely pray about it. See the culture that you have in the place that you are in. Or even if you aren't going to a church and you are feeling a little lonely in your singleness, or wondering, well, what is there? Is this it? Is there more? Definitely find that community that makes you feel safe. When it comes to church ministries, for those of you that want to create it, go to your leadership. Take that leap of faith and see what happens. And ultimately, you don't know. God can carry the whole thing and it flourish, or ultimately not. But with that being said, if you could say one last thing, what would you advise anybody out there that's listening? If they're struggling right now in this moment with singleness, what's one advice you would give them?
One advice. First and foremost, prayer, right? But if you don't have community, find ways to build it. I've been very, 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 very blessed by the community that God's put in my life, from camp ministry, through my churches, through just so many different areas. And so, and being vulnerable, I think being honest and just saying, hey, I'm feeling this way. I started looking into Fusion because I started looking at a church again, because it had been a conversation that I had with a really close friend of mine who she lives far away, but she and I have both been kind of talking about it, and I was like, I just don't feel like I have that community anymore. I feel like I've kind of lost a lot of that community locally of people who are believers and I can go to, and she had encouraged me to go and to find a church again, and it's been one of the best decisions, that like stepping out in that, but because she encouraged me to, and so if you don't have somebody who's able to encourage you or walk with you, or has some kind of community, I encourage you to build it in some way or another. I would say that's a preface. Is like, we're not God, even with the beginning, it's like God created Adam and Eve. He said for Adam it's not good to be alone. I don't think that means that everyone has to be married, but I do think it means that we're all called to relationship in some way. And so find ways to build a relationship, find ways to build community, and talk to God about that. Ask for community, because I think He's going to give you the best friends you can ask for. I think when you actually seek God, when you turn to Him, like He's put some of the best people in my life who've encouraged me in different areas, in different times, in times that have been some of the hardest I've had to walk through. So I think community, as we've said multiple times.
I agree too. Definitely building relationships. I'll say from my perspective, I can be a bit of a homebody. I could probably be home for days. If I didn't have stuff to do in my life, I could probably be home for days and feel fine with that. But like you said, it's not good for humans to be alone. And especially if you think of like any hard times, if I was going through a difficult time and I didn't make any relationships, I would have nobody to talk to, and or share happy moments with too. So I do think, like, especially if you're someone who's like, yeah, I'm a homebody, I don't need other people. I know people believe that I don't need other people. No, you do. You do need other people, and especially for those highs and lows in life. And if you struggle to, build those relationships, well, even if you're a non-believer, I'd still say go to church. You can always find those kind of relationships there. But and even while doing that, looking for a church, I would just look and see what's going on in your community too, and put yourself out there. I know people can have a lot of social anxiety, and I personally don't deal with that much. So I can't completely relate, and I know it's easier said than done to just be like, well, just do it anyway. But I do think it's something you should really try to work towards to build a community around you. And then I would say that if maybe it's not just singleness, but other things could add to this. If you're really struggling and or even dealing with depression, and singleness is part of those reasons why you might be feeling down, I would even say, talk to a professional. Therapy's good.
Yeah.
So build relationships, talk to a therapist if you need it, and go to church.
They did a really good job of covering that. But my one advice for those of you that are listening is to seek the kingdom of heaven. Seek the kingdom of heaven, and everything else will come to you. God commands us to follow Him. Whether you're listening and you're a believer and you're doing that, continue moving forward. Find that community that helps you, but don't find a community if you're not seeking God. Because ultimately, the community doesn't make you happy, doesn't give you love. The one that provides love is the one that can give love, and that is God. And for those of you that are unbelievers, take a chance. Take a chance in finding a community that can get you closer to Christ, make you happy. If you've never done that, it doesn't hurt to try. Amen. Yeah. But with that being said, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please follow us on all our social media platforms. You can listen to this on YouTube, Spotify, all the streaming platforms. And I hope you all have a blessed day. Thank you.